Hello everyone, my name is Hania Hakiel and by profession I am a psychotherapist, and today I'm speaking to my dear friend Sasha Boychenko. And Sasha, maybe I let you start this.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Hania. My name is Sasha. I am from Ukraine. I have lived in Portugal for the past 5 years. And by profession, I am a researcher. I work at an NGO called Victim Support Europe. And I also recently finished a master's in migration, which is a topic that I care about deeply and have cared about deeply for a long time. I've also worked with people who've experienced forced migration before, and until very recently, I was planning to work together with Hania on a little project of ours focused more here in Portugal, more broadly on people who are at risk of social exclusion, so including migrants, but not only. And yeah, of course, the recent war has changed everything. And so right now I am helping local organizations here in Lisbon who are trying to coordinate help for refugees who are coming here, and also humanitarian aid that is going there, while also, of course, living what is happening very directly. So I think that is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. In my work, I try to focus on supporting those who are supporting, as very often in the situation of trauma, and war is one of the most enormous traumas we can imagine. We get focused on doing. Our body, our nervous system, everything around us gets extremely fast. We have this inner sense that it's mirroring situation outside, that we don't have time, that we have to run, that we have to act quickly. And there is this longing in me to, in these moments of running, fighting, flying, to still stay deeply connected to our values, to stay deeply connected to what our bodies and our relationships may need. And I feel these two clashing needs, because one is urgency of the situation, and the other how to help, how to provide support in a way that it's not reinforcing already very oppressive dynamics that are happening. And maybe even, that's maybe a dreamer in me saying that, maybe even provide help and support that allows us, that creates an opportunity for creating new societies little better. Because when everything falls apart, and this is my inner experience, that the world I know, Europe I know, it's somehow falling apart. And in this falling apart, its pain is enormous suffering. And I also sense hope for doing something differently. And I'm actually curious when I'm saying it, if how do you resonate with it, Sasha?
It's not a very easy time to be hopeful, but I think it's therefore even more important. I think it's also what we're holding on to, and what is helping a lot of us to get through this moment, right? Because otherwise, I think, yeah, it would be very difficult to continue. And I mean, really everyone, sorry. It would be really difficult to continue carrying on what we're doing if we did not look for this kind of hope, and for this way to do things a little better, and to think about our actions and the consequences of our actions a little deeper. So yeah, I would agree.
And here maybe comes my first question. I have been contacted by quite a few people who are now welcoming Ukrainians, Ukrainian families to their homes, to their schools, to their medical centers in Poland, where I come from, what I didn't mention. And I'm noticing that there is this deep drive to share this hope with people, but maybe even going to a certain extreme of like trying to keep people positive. So I want to welcome, let's say, Ukrainian family to my home, and I want to make them happy. I want them to feel good. And as much as I resonate with this intention, there is part of me who says, hey, and what about just being with people in their pain instead of trying to push them into hope they may not be feeling at this moment, or into joy that may be very far away for them?
Say that I am so grateful for all the people who are doing this, who are welcoming people into their homes, into their schools, into their towns. It's very shocking, the scale at which it's happening, but it's very important. And of course, it warms my heart to know that there are so many people who are ready to do it and who are so eager, not only to do it, but to do it well and to do it right. I think that's already a huge deal to me, and I'm sure to people who need to flee and who need to find a place. I think it means a lot. I think there is a very difficult balance to keep, and I don't think there is kind of a one-fits-all solution on how to do it correctly. But I do think it's very important to allow this kind of space for pain and for grieving, and to not kind of gloss over the fact that these people have been forced into, I think, one of the most difficult decisions that people get to make in their lifetime. I know from the people I've spoken to, and I think we can all imagine that this is not a decision that a person takes lightly. This is not even a decision that people feel is a decision. Oftentimes it is when you are really pushed to kind of a limit, and you have to go, right? And there can be very little hope in that situation. So I think perhaps for many people it can even feel a bit offensive, you know, if you kind of come at them with the best intention, of course, of making them feel better. But if perhaps you go a bit too far in saying, you know, oh, but everything's good, and like you're safe now and you're okay and everything will be fine, I think it can even be a bit hurtful, because it feels like it denies the part of pain and tragedy and everything else that got left behind. And I think it's, for a lot of people who are leaving, they're also leaving people behind, you know. It's not even just that they've left the country, but as men are not allowed to leave, people are leaving fathers and husbands and brothers and sons behind. And so, of course, the situation continues almost as intensely. So I think it's very important to allow for this pain to exist. And I know that that's a tall order and a very difficult task, and it can be very uncomfortable, but I do think that it's very important.
When I listen to what you are sharing, there are a few things arising. One is maybe quite obvious, that to be able to be with other human being in their pain, we need to be able to feel our own pain and be able to accompany ourselves in it. And in this context, I see any form of supporting or helping also as an invitation to inner work. because I can't be with you with your pain if I am uncomfortable in silence, if I am uncomfortable with tension that is in the room. I think about my fellow Polish women who are now, I'm thinking mainly about them because I know the culture. I know many families who are welcoming now people fleeing Ukraine. And I know how strong is the pattern of making everyone at home feel good, that you can sit down and rest only when everyone is satisfied, everyone is feeling good. And in this sense, it's invitation to change this pattern as well, because we can't force people who are in ongoing trauma to feel good only so I can rest, only so I can feel good, because with your sad face, I can't. I don't know if you feel this, I believe deeply also cultural pattern I describe.
Yeah, I think it happens in many cultures, actually. I know that it is a famous thing about grandmas in Portugal as well. It is definitely a pattern in Ukraine. And I think, yes, it does come from a good place. But first, I think it does require some adjusting, because let me start this sentence over. I think you can view it as putting the work that you should be doing on someone else, and I think it's not fair, even if we're not talking about people fleeing their country. In general, I think it's probably quite a useful exercise in life to not try to put things that you should be doing, like you said, the inner work, on other people, or to not measure, your well-being or self-worth by what other people are doing or feeling or so, right? And in these situations particularly, I think, because it might be not possible for a long time to achieve the situation in which everyone is truly satisfied and happy and with a happy face. So I do think that's an important direction of exploration, and I think we're all guilty of it. We all do it. It does come from a good place. I think it gets interpreted wrong sometimes along the way, and then it ends up being even toxic, I guess, sometimes. But I think if you can hold on to the good part of it, which is, I am welcoming. I want people to feel welcomed. I want people to feel as good as they can, maybe, but not go beyond that, not go to that place where they must feel good also so that you can feel good. I think that would be a good place to start.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for that. It actually reminds me when I used to work in a center for asylum seekers in Berlin when mainly people from Syria and Afghanistan were fleeing. I remember how behavior of many volunteers back then was actually triggering certain behaviors in children who tried to satisfy this need in volunteers of seeing happy children, that they would literally change and adapt in a way to belong with these volunteers that are providing play and fun and toys, by becoming these kind of happy, sweet children. And I could really feel that it became like a pattern of behavior, pattern of adaptation of, okay, this is the type of refugee you expect me to be, and me as a child, I can't name it, but I can feel it perfectly. So I am becoming what I need to become in order to belong, and in order to preserve this support and help that I am receiving. And I think this is also this unspoken dynamic that it's happening not only between adults and children, but also between adults and adults, that in a way, when we are fleeing a country, our survival depends on others. So we start sensing what we are expecting, what we are expected to be, what we are expected to become. And I can imagine just kind of playing here with what can happen, that in the adult's case, it can be, I am expected to be independent very quickly. So even innerly, I'm in pieces, but tomorrow I will start searching for a job. Even my whole body is shaking. I'm not really present. I'm not able to focus, but I sense this expectation to prove that I'm not a burden, for example. So I will start working before I'm ready for it. There's just one example. And I wonder how you feel about it, if it's my like a gloomy mind or you can recognize something similar or opposite.
I think this is all part of a whole set of expectations, actually, that is placed on people who are fleeing. And it's, I mean, we do this all the time. It's one of, it seems that it's one of humanity's curses. We are very quick to make some expectations and then be appalled when people do not fulfill them. And so I think the same is true in this case. I think in general, we really expect people to be nice, right? They must be nice and so grateful and so unproblematic and just, yeah, accepting of everything. And when they don't, I think there's immediately a backlash, right? That, oh, you are the ungrateful refugee, right? I think there's a book with that title. That is a very good book. And I think partially I can understand this. And of course, there are many things to be grateful for towards the people who welcome people who come to them. I think it's also really important that we remember, yeah, the state that people often are when they have to flee. Like you said, it's often not a very good functioning state of a person. And so I think we also have to allow for more ways of, yeah, expressing yourself and being. And I think you mentioned the children, but I think it goes for adults as well, right? It's maybe more harmful in children, because I think you have a child, if you have a child rather than an adult, they have perhaps even less ability to not fall for this, because like you said, maybe they cannot verbalize it, but they can feel it. And so they immediately begin the process, which will probably go on, which might go on for a long time, of molding themselves to fit in a certain way that might not allow them to be how they want to be, or to feel what they actually feel. But I think the same happens with adults. And you've also mentioned looking for a job, or like being productive. That is also a thing that is very global, right? It's very general. We have this as a world as well. We always are expected to be productive, or at least look like we're being productive. And if we aren't, that is really looked down upon. And so I think this is just the case, like with any kind of disadvantaged in a certain situation or marginalized group, it just gets worse. So I think it's kind of these patterns that already exist in the world that get even deeper and have even more maybe harmful expressions, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yes. And for me, what you are sharing is bringing this question: what are the states and what are the emotions that we generally have difficulty accepting in our lives, in our households, in our societies? Because as you described, what is happening in a situation of forced migration or this enormous trauma that people go through, that everything becomes more vivid, somehow bigger and extreme, like more edgy. But at the end, it's these are the states that we already know, because we know anger, we know how it is to be exhausted, we know how it is to lose control. Just in this case, it's all bigger and kind of into our face. So for me, it's a question, what am I not allowing? So for example, when I, let's say, have difficulty with feeling my own anger, I may be terrified when a person I'm in contact with is just like a bunch of rage, because it's easier to be with someone who is sad, usually, that's my experience, than with someone who is enormously angry. And people at this moment, they have grief, they have sadness, but they have also anger, they have rage, they have energy that is stuck in their bodies, and it can get out in many ways that may be difficult for us to be with. So for me, like, getting ready for being with someone in a difficult situation is by realizing what I have difficulty accepting. And when I think about like these cultural, societal patterns, I think anger is a common one. And the second one is accepting lack of productivity. Again, something you mentioned, that it's easier to empathize with someone who is really trying hard and it's doing that and that and that, than with someone who is in pieces, who is like totally fragmented. And we know from trauma research, trauma experience, trauma therapy, that fragmentation is what's happening with people. Inner fragmentations of sensations that don't make sense anymore, even fragmentations of like inner experience of who I am. I am a loving mother and I am a person full of hate in the same time. And I am someone who is like nurturing my baby to sleep, and I am someone who could smash someone else's face, and I am all that. And how to welcome wholeness of other person when I have difficulty welcoming my own. And yeah, that's probably come back to inner work again.
Yes, you were saying about the feelings that we're less comfortable with in ourselves, and I think anger is maybe the biggest one in general. I myself have only recently started learning about dealing with anger, and I think it's because, again, this is not necessarily a feeling that is most welcomed, I think, especially for women. I think we are often socialized in a way that we don't feel angry. I thought for the longest time that I was just not an angry person and that I did not have much anger in me. Turns out that's a really big lie. And I think that that's the case for a lot of people, you know, and of course, if you don't recognize it, it has all sorts of negative consequences for you, but recognizing it is also hard work and it takes time. It's not something that you're just like, ah, okay, especially with a complex feeling like anger. And I think looking at it is already a big step, right? If you just try and recognize certain things or certain situations in which you feel angry. And I do think it can help with receiving other people's anger, but it's not, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like a very straight line, right? Or it's not something that you would immediately master, right? I think it's a process and everyone needs to learn. I don't think anyone is innately very good at it, maybe some people more than others. But I do think that with anger, it's also kind of universal. It's something that we could all probably benefit from exploring in a little more detail.
Oh, yes. Big yes to it. And it actually reminds me one of the like intervision spaces I have been facilitating for people who are working with people searching for asylum, for safety, back then in Germany where I lived. And I remember a big topic was not allowing yourself to be angry at someone who is suffering. That not only accepting or like being able to contain other person's anger, but when we perceive someone as a victim, as someone who is in a stage of suffering, we feel that we can't have any negative feelings towards this person. And for me, that's even more dangerous, because we start bottling up this anger and not allowing ourselves to experience everything we are experiencing in this situation. And of course, it can have a lot of health consequences, but also consequences for the relationship, because you are not fully you. And it brings me to a concept of boundaries. One thing I have been reflected on, that trauma of invasion, your country being invaded by another country, is also trauma of your boundaries, like personal boundaries being invaded, like brutally, without respect to your integrity. Like, if I know that here we talk about the country as a whole, but as a human being who is a citizen of this country, from my experience listening to people, it translates also to personal experience. And paradoxically, I don't know, I would be very curious, what is your opinion about it? What is your experience when I set boundaries around me, also with people who are suffering? I am sending this message that boundaries are important, that human beings have right to have borders and boundaries. So even setting them is uncomfortable for everyone to receive it, to offer it. But for me, this is like a big protest against any type of invasion, physical, psychological. And I know it's a little abstract what I'm saying, but I wonder if it sounds very unclear. Please tell me.
To me, it sounds very clear, but I think it also because I am currently living it. You mention the invasion of a country, sort of feeling like an invasion of personal boundaries. And I've mentioned to you earlier in a private conversation that I've had a difficult time going to the city and being with other people. And I think that's precisely the reason for it. It feels so intrusive, even though no one is intruding on anything. I'm surrounded by wonderful, respectful people. But it feels like it. And I do think it's very important. And in this case, I think for everyone on all the sides of this situation to set some boundaries, or to follow the ones that you already have, or maybe to explore the ones that you already have. But I think it might look a bit differently for maybe those helping and those being helped. Maybe you have some more concrete thoughts than me on that.
Funny enough, I wanted to ask you in which situations do you feel in this very fragile time that unintentionally your very fragile boundaries are being invaded by people's questions or people's reactions or people's good intentions, and in which situations you feel, oh, that was safe, someone approached me in a way that felt safe?
The first thing that came to mind was this exaggerated positivity that we just talked about. I think for some reason it's been quite difficult, even though I know that people mean really well and they want to be hopeful and to support me. But there's, every time someone says, yeah, everything will be fine and everything will be okay, there's this contraction inside me. Like I literally want to turn myself away from the person saying it. So I think that goes to show the boundaries feeling like they're being crossed, because it feels like you're just saying things, you don't know how it will be, you do not know how I feel, and you do not know whether it will be okay or not. And I really don't mean to sound rude or ungrateful or anything, but I do think that that I'm not the only one who feels that way, right? Because when you are in a situation of a lot of uncertainty, but you are the one who is more directly affected by it than the person who is reassuring you, it feels like they're kind of giving you answers or like a false hope or something that it just doesn't really seem well placed, and then otherwise, I think it's been mostly just my kind of subjective alone experience of not wanting to be with people too much, because all the other interactions I've had, which were just friends checking in and asking how I was doing and not telling me that everything will be fine, but instead saying, that they can't imagine how difficult it must be, or asking me whether I need anything, all of those seem much more gentle and much more welcoming. And in those situations, I've also felt much better.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing it. I know it's very personal and comes from a place of vulnerability. So thank you so much for sharing that. And what you shared about like not feeling safe in a public spaces and having this sense of contraction or insecurity in different moments brings me to a really unexplored space of how the external events are really embodied in us. There is no science to explain how invasion onto a country can translate into feeling of your skin being a safe space. There is no direct link between it, and yet there is. And it brings me to invitation to be curious rather than having answers. Because there is so many things we will not understand about human reactions, and what we are experiencing can be also so symbolic and so metaphorical and so unrelated theoretically, that we may not be able to make sense of it. And allowing people to not make sense, and allow ourselves to not be able to make sense out of it, is for me like another invitation that is extremely difficult and yet so necessary. And maybe one example also that comes to me is that I remember one woman who was a person fleeing from Syria, and she had this thing that there was just a certain pitch of voice that she was able to hear. People who were speaking higher voice or lower voice, she was just like literally getting into a panic attack. And of course we can rationalize it, or maybe it reminds her the sound of bombs, or maybe it reminds her a sound of something. But just making her not feel that something is wrong with her, just this was the thing that she said she needed the most. She didn't need to understand why she became like that, or she didn't even need us to like try to feed with our voice only to this like slow window where she felt comfortable. She just wanted to know that she's not broken, and that's okay to be irrational in reactions, so to speak.
Yes, this also makes me think, that the making sense of things is also another human universal that we seem to touch upon today, because we, in general, I think, we are very uncomfortable with things that don't make sense. I think our brain is kind of set on like a constant sense-making mission. And it's very useful, I think, in many situations. And we know that it simplifies things and makes our life easier in many instances. But I think it can also be quite, limiting in what we allow ourselves to do and to feel. It also made me think that sometimes we have a need to explain another much more than we have a need to explain ourselves. Like, I think people often are maybe more okay if they have an irrational reaction to something. Maybe you are more able to, of course, I don't have any statistical data on it. I'm just kind of, imagining, at least to me, it seems. And then when we see another person kind of act in a really irrational way, or do something, or express some feelings that we really can't explain, then I think we can be very quick to jump to trying to explain it, right? So I think it could also be useful to maybe allow for a little more of this irrationality also on both sides.
Oh, that brings me to somehow it brings me to another expectation we often have towards people who are suffering, and we perceive as irrational or not allowed when they are experiencing joy or, smiling, laughing. They can't be real refugees. I'm sorry if they are having fun. It's like if they are laughing at the train station, they can't be going through a real horror. And if that feels comfortable for you to share, I'm truly curious, what are reactions of, for example, your friends, people you know, how they are dealing with rational and irrational ways of coping or ways of being you are observing among people that are around you.
So interestingly, most of the people I know have so far chosen not to leave. So the people I know the best are all still in Ukraine. And I do know that for the people who have left, so friends of friends, usually young women and women with children, that it has been very difficult. I think it's so acute still, it's so early, that I don't think there's been a lot of space for many feelings, really. It took around 4 days for people to get from somewhere around Kyiv into Poland, which means for most of the days of the war at the time that we're speaking. So I think it's maybe a bit too early to say. I think there's just been a lot of like standing in line and getting to the border, and that, of course, I don't know how people experienced, but I do hope that they start finding joy. That's also such a strange thing to say, what you just mentioned, but I do know that some people feel that way, because I think it's to be applauded and to be held onto a moment in which you can feel joy, if you feel like smiling, if you feel like laughing in a horrible situation. I think that should be, commanded and not judged. I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to feel that joy, to find it in you, or just to spontaneously burst out laughing for whatever reason. I think it's, well, almost life-saving sometimes. So I think it's very important to not judge people for it.
Thank you that you are mentioning that. I mention it because that's definitely something I heard, I experienced, and it goes both directions. Also, as people feeling that they are people who are on the, let's say, supporting side, in welcoming side, that they shouldn't show any signs of joy, that they should hide or withdraw from any form of pleasurable activity. And because it may offend people, or it may be not empathic, for example, or not attuned. And what I am very connected to is that invasion and occupation is not only on a physical, geographical territory, but it's also happening physically in our bodies. And in a way, we give up, or we are occupied, we are invaded when we lose contact with aliveness. And aliveness is also pleasure, it's joy, it's sadness, it's anger, is all of that. And it's almost like pleasure and joy were form of resistance as well. I may not go to a fight, but I will not let you win over me and over my life by still enjoying these little things, like ice cream. Let it be really little, but real.
Understand the concern for not wanting to maybe bother someone with too much joy or something like that. But I think as long as people, I don't want to say like use common sense, because that's a bit of a weird expression, but I think, you know, as long as you ask maybe for some consent, or, you know, you offer an activity that is pleasurable, but maybe it's not something extreme, maybe it's not something too long, not too loud. I think that is frequently very welcome, because of course, and maybe there's not always a good moment for it, but I think as humans, we do search for these little moments of happiness, even, or perhaps especially when we feel at our worst. We just might not be able to do it right then in that moment, or maybe not how someone imagines we should feel joy, but I do think we can definitely get there. And I think if we have an offer for it coming from someone who is supporting us, I think that is generally welcomed and well received. And in general, I think humor is a great coping tool. And I think a lot of Ukrainians, including me, have been surviving thanks to a large amount of very funny memes that are circulating around these days. And I think there's no shame in it. You know, it's a powerful tool. I think it really helps people cope. Maybe, again, not always or not for everyone, but generally, I would say it's very valuable and nothing to be ashamed of.
It's somehow again brings me to this ability to be authentically like present in this moment and attuned to yourself first and then to a person, and welcoming what it's naturally arising. It can be tears, it can be anger, but it can be joy, or a, I don't know, impulse to dance even and sing. And I think this being peaceful with myself, I can have this courage to, I can have courage to propose, I don't know, going to a forest with a family I'm welcoming. And I can feel okay when the family says no, because I know that my value doesn't depend on making them happy, whatever happy is. And because when I am not okay with myself, and I have this like neurotic need to make them feel better, they will feel it. And even they really just want to lay down and stare into the ceiling, they would say yes to my forest excursion idea, because they will feel that I need it. They will be afraid that our relationship will be affected if they say no. And I'm not saying they will verbalize it, but this is this unspoken dynamic that it's happening between us when we feel safe to say no. And this safety comes when I am okay with your no as well.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to ask again.
Yeah.
You know, I just received a message a couple days ago from a friend asking if I wanted to go for a coffee, and it was a really sweet message, and I was in no state to go for a coffee. So I wrote her, and yeah, I said, I'm sorry, but I couldn't right now. And she replied very, very apologetically. She was like, oh, I'm so sorry to have bothered you, and I really didn't mean to. And so then I had to get back to her, and I was like, no, it's fine. You don't have to apologize. You did not bother me, and please ask again. It's just not right now, you know. And I think it's important to, like you said, to be okay with receiving a no, and ideally also to not be discouraged to ask again in a little while.
Oh, thank you for mentioning it. It's to ask again. It's I'm also thinking about many like ideas for support that people have that are just not attuned to the present moment. As you said, now people are in a need for protection, like physical protection, and this need for being physically safe is dominating everything else. And there is no yet time for feeling, because feeling could take people out of this activation mode. You would make it impossible to cross from Kiev to Warsaw in these like very chaotic times if you would allow yourself to feel what's there to feel. That's not the time for that. And I'm also thinking about this pacing, like, okay, now it's time for mobilization, activation, and there will be time for feeling that would be probably this low that people will go into after this like really high adrenaline rush to safe place. And to understand, okay, that's the time for slowing down, for letting people be, and then noticing when it's a moment to, okay, maybe bring a little activation to their bodies, to the relationship, but without pushing, but knowing that if that wasn't the moment, maybe tomorrow that will be. And to not be attached, okay, these are depressed people, let's leave them, or these are highly activated people. No, they are people on a wave, so to speak.
Exactly. And on a huge wave, right? So it's also, the register is very high, the intensity of the things that's happening is very high, the speed with which things are happening is very high. So I think it's important to kind of allow, I guess, some time to pass, to maybe not, I don't know, I'm going to exaggerate, but just to illustrate the point, you know, maybe not to jump at people immediately with language classes and integration courses and job offers and things like that, because it's probably right now is not the time, and it will definitely come and be very important. But I think, like you said, like first we have the physical safety, right? Then you probably still need some time of, I would imagine, at least a little bit of like unstructured recovery time, you know, and then you can start getting into some low-key activities first, and then something more large scale later. Again, I don't think there's a one size fits all, and for some people I think it can be the opposite can be true. Perhaps they would prefer to jump into something right away and, I don't know, maybe deal with their feelings later. But generally speaking, I think allowing some space for kind of just being, as we also talked about already, I think is very important.
Now, listening and imagining this big wave that you are describing, I'm recognizing in myself the kind of a doubt that I have myself is I imagine that for different moments on this wave, wherever you are on this wave, there are also different topics and different themes that people are happy or willing to talk about. And again, I know that it's not one size fits all. There is this enormous individuality difference, and asking and receiving consent is always the way to go. In the same time, I notice that I sometimes stop myself from maybe asking certain questions because I feel that's not yet the moment. That's not the time, for example, for making sense out of things, because there is too big disconnection between even survival brain that it's rushing towards protection and the rational brain that it's able to analyze and find meaning and find purpose and understanding. And I wonder if you are noticing in yourself or in your friends, people you know, that there are some things that's not yet a moment to talk about, that maybe some questions that you already know, they are for later, forgetting that there is individual difference as well.
Because it's not even a question, it's like a whole topic to explore. I think, first of all, it's probably not the end of the world, right? If you ask something that it's not the time to ask yet. And I think you cannot know for sure, right? With every person in every situation, I think it's also completely okay if you ask a wrong question, unless you're asking 1,000. I think it's really quite manageable, right? But I think, weirdly enough, I sense that we are all like 100% in the present. So anything about the future is kind of not on the radar right now. And it's strange because I would imagine that maybe we should be hopeful for the future or something, to trying to find something to look forward to, especially for people on the move. You could also imagine that maybe it is useful, but I think no one just has the capacity, you know? And so I was asked a question about my future earlier today, and it just gave me like a completely blank face. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't even go there. And I think many people feel the same way. The way I talk to my friends, the way I talk to my parents, everything is so much about right now and staying safe right now. And what are you doing tonight? And let me know as soon as you wake up. And then we talk about that morning. And very little goes into planning anything beyond kind of the next step. So for people who are leaving, it's also very much about planning only their next steps. And I don't think many people have, it's not even about willingness. I think it's really kind of the capacity or the headspace to think or talk much about the future. So that's like a very general answer to your question, but a big one, I think.
Yes, thank you so much for that. It's a place that I think I would also go intuitively to not speak about the future, like, and in the same time I noticed that when I'm seeing my friends here in Portugal, who are neither Ukrainian, some of them Polish, but mainly from all over, including Portugal, topic about the future is dominating. There is very little about present moment. It's other way around. It's like, where is it going? What Ukraine will do if, what we will do if, it's so many ifs that people who are not directly affected, they are going into like this anxiety in maybe another way, going to find safety by controlling the future, while you are finding safety by controlling the present moment. And maybe that's the point of kind of misunderstanding, but because you will talk about so different things here.
Yeah, I think actually you just put your finger on a big mismatch that is happening between people, because I didn't have that impression, but I think it makes sense what you're saying. And I think it also makes sense in general if you are not, let's say, if you are feeling a crisis or living a crisis, but maybe not in such an acute stage. Of course, it makes sense to think about the future and to think about what you could do, or even be worried about what could happen. And I just think for us, it's kind of a luxury we don't have right now. And I think it does create a certain barrier kind of for planning things or even discussing things, especially if someone expects, I guess, if we were talking about expectations. So I think if someone places an expectation on a person who is not able to think about the future, I think it creates some avoidable tension.
Yeah, I very much feel you on that. And I notice in myself, as a person that it's not directly affected, yet being very closely now with my friends in Krakow who are just all in the middle of organizing accommodation and support for thousands of people arriving, and also with some of my friends who are Ukrainians. I notice in myself like this tension and anger, like really strong anger, where instead of being here and now and feeling the pain of this moment or noticing where can I be of service to people, there is this intellectual discussion about could we prevent it, or could we predict, could have we predicted it, or what do we do if. I notice really enormous wave of anger in myself, and I feel like I want to be here and now, in my own safety, sharing this safety with people who don't have it, and being humble about having no control, because if these situations teaches me something, is how illusionary is control over the future. And I'm very careful to say that I am like learning from other people's experience, and in the same time I'm feeling that this is really becoming very embodied since the invasion on Ukraine, that my body learned there is no control.
That is a very, very hard pill to swallow. But, I think there is not even a harm in kind of analyzing things if you can. But I do feel that anger as well. So I think maybe one of the ways forward would be to not place this expectation on other people. I think if you are able to, it's also difficult in the age of social media and everything screaming at us from everywhere. It's difficult to control it, but I think it's okay for people to be doing their own thing, right? And if someone is able to analyze and look past and look into the future and, I don't know, try to make some sense of it right now already, that's okay. But I think if one expects Ukrainians who are directly suffering from this to engage with this right now, we're not going to. Some people are, because some people also find it empowering to continue engaging with it. I find it impossible right now. You know, it's suddenly all these things, they don't matter right now. I think I care deeply about some of these topics, and I also tried to talk with my friends, and I did a little bit of this kind of information spreading before, you know, and I think there will be a time for that in the future. But I think right now a lot of people can't, like I certainly can't, and it's just not a time for it. So I think as long as you don't expect anyone to engage with you, it's okay.
Maybe there are two things I would like to share in response. One is that I noticed that part of my anger that is like very, you know, very childish anger. It's not this anger that I would like to do something with. It's just that I just feel that it's like this protection that I'm creating. And part of it is this impression that intellectualization can be also a form of avoiding feeling. To not feel own fear, I will try to get intellectual control over it. And it brings me, like, kind of wrapping up, personally, it brings me to a place where we started, or at least where I departed from, this vision of creating a different relational culture based on the fact that things are falling apart. So what I mean here is that, for example, if I'm not ready to engage with people who are intellectualizing, I would like to normalize stepping back. And for example, even if I'm sitting in a cafe with friends, saying, I will stay silent, or even I will leave for half an hour because I don't feel I can process it. I think I will just get angry and go into a very immature conversation that I don't want for myself and I don't want for you. And like stepping back, for example, as a natural and normal thing to do, that culturally I don't think it's so well accepted. And I wanted to be, again, as normalizing saying no, also stepping back out of uncomfortable situations.
Definitely. I think that one is the worst. The stepping back, I think it's probably the highest on the list of things we've discussed, because I think if, for instance, being with some discomfort, I think we are a little bit better able to, or it has become already a bit more normalized to maybe sit in silence with someone. I think there's been progress on that front. Stepping back, I think, is still, it's a huge thing. I know that I struggle with it myself. It feels very rude. It feels very, I don't know, weak somehow, even though I think it's strong to be able to. It's also like a boundary setting thing as well, right? If you can be like, okay, you know, and it doesn't have to be so dramatic at all. It doesn't have to be a conflict. You can just be like, I'm checking out of this conversation. But I agree with you. I think it's very not normalized yet. It's not really a thing that we do. I do think that would help with a lot of debates, if I can call them that, but to bring it more to what we were talking about before. I think in any interaction, if you can have a little bit more space for in all directions, I think it always ends up being a win-win. If you feel like you are capable of both going forward and stepping back, of asking something and hearing no as a response, and of asking again, I do think that ends up benefiting kind of everyone along the way.
I love what you said about space. If there is one thing I would like to close our conversation with and take it with me, it would be exactly this message about allowing space. and maybe just that's it, allowing space in interaction. And somehow I'm sure in this space thing will evolve in its own pace, in its own, with respect to its own process. So that would be something I'm taking with space. And I wonder if there is anything you would like to add, or something that you would like to add to close with.
No, I just want to thank you for holding the space today.
I feel we held. I don't know what is the correct English grammar.
We hold the space for wrong English verbs as well.
Exactly. Thank you for holding it together. I definitely feel we were holding it together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Hania.